Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thanks for sharing your day with us. President Trump minutes away from a speech to a big labor union meeting here in Washington. Jobs and the economy are his focus, we are told, and we'll take you there live when it happens. Also, a bit of breaking news out of the White House. The first White House reaction to a horrendous gas attack in Syria. We'll bring you those words in just a minute. Plus, a little bit of Trump-style bad cop, good cop on health care. The president threatens House conservatives, but the vice president meets them with a very different message. Let's make a deal.
There is no deal in principle. There is a solid idea that was offered that, as we look at, we'll have to evaluate as it affects premiums. But I can tell you that the Vice President did a good job of articulating that, and we're certainly encouraged by the progress that we seem to be making.
And the Senate poised to go nuclear, meaning here in Washington a dramatic rules change so Republicans can overcome Democratic opposition to President Trump's Supreme Court pick.
Yeah, this is going to be very bad. Let me tell you what's going to happen. The judges are going to become more ideological because you don't have to reach across the aisle to get one vote any longer. So this is going to haunt the Senate. It's going to change the judiciary, and it's so unnecessary.
With us to share their reporting and their insights, Margaret Talev of Bloomberg Politics, Matt Pfizer of the Boston Globe, Olivier Knox of Yahoo News, and CNN's Dana Bash. I want to just start with this warning to you. If you have children in the room, you might want to ask them to leave. These images we're about to show you are quite graphic. Fresh panic this morning in Syria over a suspected chemical weapons attack. At least 10 children and dozens more, men and women, killed when airstrikes pelted a city in that country's Idlib province. Human rights groups say the victims did not die from shrapnel. And in images escaping that war-torn country, you don't see the typical carnage we're used to seeing when bombs fall from the sky or gunfire. Innocents maimed and bleeding to death. No, that's not what we see. These pictures are horrible. Victims choked to death, poisoned, activists say, by a still unidentified toxic gas or chemical. Videos and pictures posted online show people struggling to breathe, collapsing where they stood. Others already laying motionless as emergency personnel tried to hose them down. The images are already prompting sharp criticism here at home. Senator John McCain, who was a fierce critic of the Obama administration's Syria policy, says the new administration is also showing weakness.
I'm sure they took note of what our Secretary of State said just the other day, that the Syrian people would be determining their own future themselves. That one of the more incredible statements I've ever heard, given the involvement of Hezbollah, of the Iranians, of the Russians, and of course the barrel bombing and precision strikes by Russian aircraft into hospitals in Aleppo. So I'm sure they're encouraged to know that the United States is withdrawing and seeking some kind of new arrangement with the Russians, and it is another disgraceful chapter in American history, and it was predictable.
That's Senator John McCain on CNN this morning. We have not heard from President Trump on this heinous attack. We did just moments ago hear from his press secretary, Sean Spicer. Let me read you some of that. Today's chemical attack in Syria against innocent people, including women and children, is reprehensible and cannot be ignored by the civilized world. These heinous actions by the Bashar al-Assad regime are a consequence of the past administration's weakness in irresolution. He went on to talk about President Obama drawing the so-called red line. There is no question the Obama administration did draw a red line and then did not do much in Syria. But Donald Trump is the president of the United States now. Number one, you can look backwards and blame all you want. But what does this president do? I don't think I've heard him speak the word Syria since he became president. This past week, his UN ambassador, his Secretary of State have said our focus is not on getting Assad out of power. What do they do when these pictures?
Right, and that's really not that this is about politics right now. This is a tragedy right now. But politically and in the U.S., the positioning is unfortunate for President Trump because his administration's entire attack was we're focusing on ISIS, not on getting Assad out. And this underscores why Assad is such a problem.
This is what Assad does when the world focuses on ISIS and not getting Assad out. You got to do more than one thing at a time.
So in the sort of early statements, and Sean Spicer's briefing off camera today, but we're seeing the notes from this briefing, and he's saying that the position on Assad was not an issue of being comfortable with him, but a reflection of the political realities on the ground. And that may be true, but this is going to force at least a re-examination of the way the administration talks about it and perhaps a reexamination of what they're willing to do about it.
The other thing is the first instinct is to point the finger somewhere else, to the Obama administration, which no question they were muddled over how to handle Syria, how much to do in Syria. But, Trump now has the White House, and he's not talking about, at least not yet, what the role should be for the United States. And they've sort of been soft on Assad, sort of saying that it's changing the U.S. policy on how we deal with Bashar al-Assad and keeping him in place.
Yeah, look, the Obama administration failed. I don't even think Obama administration officials would dispute that with you. The president drew a red line, and then he looked at a menu of really bad options, and he wasn't willing to do things that other people said. John McCain at one point said, send in deadly weapons, help the opposition more. Now we're 6 years later, but we're 75 days into a new administration, and whatever they inherited, whatever legitimate right they have to say, we didn't start this or the problem's worse because of what we inherited, he's the president. What does he do?
He is. And Margaret, you said this isn't about politics, and you're totally right. It's about policy. What is the policy? We don't have a clue what his policy is. And we certainly didn't get any more information from the White House this morning. You mentioned earlier in the green room, and I think this is a good point, the President of the United States had the microphone. He had lots and lots of cameras this morning talking to CEOs about a different topic, but that never stopped him before. He could have used the bully pulpit to stand up and say, this is wrong. Children, no matter where they are in the world, innocent civilians, men, women, and children alike, should not be gassed like this. And even if he said we need to figure out how to do it, just to say that would signal to every ally in the world, every foe in the world, that at least he's engaged, he knows about it, he's interested in it.
And it's a routine practice. Presidents have an event on one subject, something happens in the country or in the world, and they say, I'll get to what I'm here for in a minute, but I have something I need to say. President Trump did not do that this morning. He passed on that opportunity. We're going to see the president at the bottom of the hour. We'll see if he brings it up then after these comments by his press secretary. But Olivia, what strikes me is presidents have to pick. The presidency is about choices, sometimes awful, bad choices. But the president has been quite public, saying China must help us in North Korea or else we will act alone. We have not heard him saying Putin must help us in Syria or else we will finish the sentence.
No, we haven't at all, actually. And what we've seen is a dramatic military escalation in the campaign against ISIS. Marines waded ashore a few weeks ago in Syria. There's been a dramatic escalation on that score. The Trump administration has tried to keep some of that hidden. What we don't know now is whether that has actually complicated the picture on the ground. If you have American forces in the field in Syria, does that change how you respond to, say, something by Bashar Assad? I'm relatively okay with them looking backward and saying, well, hold on a second, this isn't actually our mess. We didn't start this. This isn't. But I am struck by the absence of any reference, at least in what you read, to Bashar Assad's patron, which is Vladimir Putin.
Right, not at all here. He says we do go back to what Sean Spicer said again, to his credit. Reprehensible, cannot be ignored by the civilized world. These heinous actions by the Bashar al-Assad regime are a consequence, then he goes on to pass the blame, are a consequence of the past administration's weakness in a resolution. President Obama said in 2012 he would establish a red line. And then he goes on to say the United States stands with our allies across the globe to condemn this intolerable act. The question is, he's the press secretary, what do we hear from the president? And again, we live this in the Obama administration. The choices here are all bad. There's no attitude among the American people, and there's no real option if Bashar Assad is in power to send American troops in there. There was talk early on in the Civil War about supporting the anti-Assad factions. Most of them have crumbled now. So there aren't great options, but we could at least hear some moral outrage from the President of the United States.
Or where do you turn at a moment with Rex Tillerson not sort of having a very muscular role in the administration to having some sort of diplomacy, reaching out to these allies and trying to figure out sort of building a coalition to go up against what's happening in Syria, which is what John Kerry tried to do and was unsuccessful.
Yeah. Well, let's listen. I just want to get this down. Let's listen. Again, I don't believe the president, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe President Trump has addressed this issue at all in his first 75 days. His United Nations ambassador, who has sounded much more hawkish than the president of the United States has, did an interview with Martha Raddatz on ABC this Sunday, where number one, she said our focus is not on regime change anymore, essentially going public with what became pretty much the private position of the Obama administration. They couldn't figure out how to affect regime change. But listen here, she did have very tough words about the Syrian president.
He is a war criminal. He has done terrible things to his own people. He has used chemical weapons on his own people. He continues to be a hindrance to peace. Our goal is we want to bring Assad to justice. We want him to pay for the crimes that he's done. We're not going to stop beating up on him. We're not going to stop saying that the way he treats the people in Syria is wrong, that he has actually killed his own people.
I would love to know her conversations with the White House right now. She laid down that marker on Sunday. He's a war criminal. We still want justice for him. Even though they're saying we're not looking for regime change tomorrow, he's a war criminal. We want justice. That's Sunday. What do you say after you see these pictures?
Yeah. And President Trump, so much of his campaign posture was to say that that a U.S. president can actually do a lot or not do a lot based on how tough they talk, how seriously other leaders take the threat of them. So his next steps will be a measure of how he puts his campaign rhetoric into action.
But that's a good reminder, playing that soundbite from the weekend from Nikki Haley, because it's not the first time that we have seen her act like a traditional Republican, a traditional Republican leader on such issues.
And almost get out ahead of the White House trying to pull them along with her.
Exactly, exactly. And I know the first time she did this, I believe it was on Vladimir Putin, I was told from sources familiar with the conversations that she didn't just freelance. She did it, and she told the White House she was going to do that. I'm sure she did the same thing in this situation. She was put out by the White House on these shows, and obviously Syria was going to be a question that she was going to be asked. The question is whether or not she is going to pull anybody in the White House along based on those comments.
Listen, a day after she said that, Sean Spicer from the podium said that Assad in power is the political reality, and they've made peace with the political reality.
Said that again today.
And Nikki Haley had herself said some rather soft things about Assad the previous week. So those Sunday show appearances, she might be, I don't think she's freelancing exactly, but I don't know how closely they're watching what she says from the United Nations.
She has a horrible tragedy today to maybe help her make her case internally. As we go to break, I just want to say this is what the president said during the campaign. Assad is fighting ISIS. He's fighting ISIS. Russia's fighting ISIS. And Iran is fighting ISIS. We have to do one thing at a time. That was his emphasis during the campaign, trying to make a deal to fight ISIS. We'll see what the president says about this tragedy. We're not going to be overly gratuitous with these images, but they are horrible. They are reprehensible. We will see what we hear from the president. Up next, the spy novel playing out here in Washington unfurls a few more character twists.